Hello, I'm the Grub Street blogger, and this is the books I read in February. Now, in January, I read about time travel, and I had a theme this month, but it was more of a sort of theme necklace with one book leading to another rather than everything being about the same thing. I started with Lord Minimus by Nick Page. Now, this is the biography of Geoffrey Hudson, who was a proportionate dwarf who was the dwarf of King Charles I's wife, Henrietta Maria. I've mentioned him before. In fact, I visited his birthplace. Except one of the first things this book says is that that isn't his birthplace. There's a lot of myth and a lot of legend and a lot of story that has gone around him. And so the book has a big job unpicking these things to try and find the real story. And it's an amazing one. I mean, there's this boy, he's born, he's just under 2 foot tall, and he is essentially sold to the Duke of Buckingham, who then gives him to the Queen in a pie. And then he's like her pet or her doll. She dresses him up, but he's quite smart, and he's not prepared to just do this. He learns things, and he learns how to shoot and how to ride, and he learns court wit, and he becomes famous and popular for being funny in and of himself. And so then he's not just the dwarf. See here, he's with a monkey, and sort of the implication is, this is him when he's 15. The implication is that, like the monkey, he's a pet, but he becomes more than that. And then the Civil War starts, and he actually comes into his own. He becomes a captain of the horse, probably not in any battles, but very, very possibly in some skirmishes. And he's with the Queen all the way through her travels to the Netherlands to raise money, in England where she was shelled at Bridlington, and then through the country to escape to France. Whilst there, he declares, "I'm a captain of the captain of the horse now. I'm not just this plaything. If anyone takes the piss, I'm going to duel you." And so people think, this will be fun. And they take the piss in order to have the duel. And the guy who did it came with a water pistol, essentially. It was a firefighting tool, but like a big squirt gun. And this pissed him off. And so they got on these two horses with real guns. And galloping, this person here shot the other guy right in the middle of the head. I mean, not a good act, because you're murdering someone, but there's a certain amount of skill and competence in there. And so this is his story. He was then exiled because he should have been killed according to the laws of where they were, but he's exiled, captured by Barbary pirates, lives as a slave in North Africa for about 25 years, comes back to the country where there's been new monarchy. King Charles II's come back, has decided, right, I'm going to try and get a bit of money off him for all my years of good service. Gets a little bit, but because his mistress, Henrietta Maria, was Catholic, and we're now in the time of Titus Oates and the Catholic plot, he gets arrested on no evidence whatsoever, and put in prison in England for another 2 years. And then he comes out and dies. And this is a tough person. 25 years as a slave, and then 2 years in a British prison. He was tough, and apparently he was very funny and witty and good company. And as the book says at the end, he deserves to be remembered. I think he does, because what a life! It's amazing, and this book tells it very well, and it tells a lot about the court of King Charles I and of Henrietta Maria, who, when she was queen, was 15. There was only 5 years difference between them. Just this whole thing of this 15-year-old girl, and she's married this man, and the whole court is shut off from the rest of the country. They're all having a nice time, putting on masks, thinking they're doing great, while the rest of the country thinks they're awful, and then civil war. And it's very, very good. I mean, I know Nick Page as the author of the Tabloid Bible and Associated Things, which is it's the Bible told as a tabloid newspaper. It's very entertaining. But It w- it didn't set me up as a person thinking he was going to write a really good biography, and he does. And so he gets through the weeds to get to the real things, and then he bulks out the text with, what's going on around. And some people might find that a little bit annoying, the more in there about the court of Henrietta Maria than they might like or something. But I think it does a really good job, and I thought it was very, very good. The next book I read has a very direct comparison. It was inspired by the same book. It's called The Smallest Man. It's a novel about someone called Nat Davy. And Nat Davy is a proportionate dwarf, and he is sold to the Duke of Buckingham, and he's given to the Queen, Henrietta Maria, in a pie, where he's treated as a doll, but then gains other skills and becomes more, more there's more about him and shows it to people. And then Civil War comes, and he accompanies the Queen, and he accompanies her to Denmark, and he accompanies her to Bridlington, and he comes her through France. And then there's a duel, and the guy comes with a squirt gun, and they go on two horses, and they shoot each other at each other, and he gets the guy in the forehead, and he's exiled. And then it goes different. He goes back to Britain, hides out, and on the restoration of the monarchy, or just before that, he gets pardoned and finds the woman he loves, and they live together. You may notice that those stories are almost exactly the same, except for the fact that this person is called Nat Davy, while this real person was called Geoffrey Hudson. And there is a bit in the afterword of the book about that she's called him Nat Davy because she wants to tell her own story, inspired by this. It's not a biographical novel, it's a novel inspired by this man's biography. I can't get on board with that because the details are so similar. They're born in the same town, to the same parents. Everything he does is pretty much exactly the same. She fleshes it out more, and actually, it's a really good book for friendships. She's really, really good at writing friendships. The friendships between Nat and the Queen, friendships between Nat and this giant doorkeeper who really existed, and all this. She's really good at this. A friendship between him and his brother. She fleshes out his Civil War experience, makes him more of a sort of a spy using his small size and things. But she follows the real actions so much, and everybody in here gets their real name. Even the little shit that challenged him to a duel gets his real name. The only person that doesn't is Geoffrey. And so, while I enjoyed the book, I can't say I very much approve of the book because, as I think Geoffrey deserves to be known for himself, and I think that there's far too much of Geoffrey in the book to change his name, especially when no one else gets their name changed. So, yeah, mixed feelings on that book. So then I went from one novel, but really autobiographical novel, to another autobiographical novel of a small person. This is Mrs. Tom Thumb by Melanie Benjamin. We're a bit later in time. We're in the 19th century. We're in America, and we have a woman called Lavinia Warren Bump. And she was a true woman. She existed. She was a proportionate dwarf, as was her younger sister, but the rest of her brothers and sisters weren't. And she became the schoolmistress in her town. But she didn't run away. She decided to not do that anymore and went off to perform on a showboat, and there P.T. Barnum heard about her, and she became part of the American Museum that P.T. Barnum run, and she married Tom Thumb, whose real name is Charles Stratton, and a lot of the book is about their relationship and her relationship with P.T. Barnum, and then she and Charles, they go on tour around the whole world. They're the first group of American performers to tour Australia. They go to India. They go all over the place. They see so much of the world, and a lot of it in the book is powered by her, Vinnie's, passion to see the world. She sees the world. It's so big. It's so brilliant. There's so much. She wants to see it all, and so she's very ambitious and she's very smart. She's not nice in some ways. She marries Charles, and she says, right, I'll be as good a wife as I can, but she doesn't really love him. She does it mostly for the publicity. And she and Barnum are kind of in on this together. of hoodwinking Charles. And she never really respects him at all. In fact, if anything, this whole story is like a tragic love story because she really loves P.T. Barnum. She finds him sexually attractive a number of times, and the two of them have a mental simpatico in the book. They're on each other's level where none of the other characters are. So it's all about, really, the book is all about them coming to a piece together through all these other events and things. Some of them very unpleasant. Her little her little sister Minnie has a daughter, and there's a problem because Minnie is under 2 foot, and the baby she's about to give birth to is a normal sized baby, and as happened in history, she died, and this is portrayed in a gruesome and very visceral way in this book, and that's sort of her biggest regret, that she got Minnie involved in this life. Yeah, it's quite a complex book, really. I very much enjoyed it. It was because Vinny herself is such a driven character in it, and because she is quite cold and calculating, but at the same time, you feel for her because her expectation was, being a schoolmistress was impressive in her town, and that was supposed to be it. She was supposed to live with her parents and be looked after, and so she takes the world. Um, but like all people that take the world, there's some dodgy bits in there. But I really like it. She had a lot of depth. P.T. Barnum had a lot of depth. Charles Stratton, Tom Thumb, didn't have a lot of depth. He was essentially, a child star as he was, and like a lot of child stars, he's kind of empty. He just wants to please, and he was really nice. He was a really likable character in it, and you wanted better for him, really. But at least he died feeling that he'd been loved. Oh dear. Right. So we went from this novel with P.T. Barnum to this novel with P.T. Barnum. It's called The Transformation of Bartholomew Fortuno. And this is a novel. It's got the real character of P.T. Barnum, and it has his wife. And there's mentions of people like Tom Thumb and Lavinia and things in it. But it's all about a fictional living skeleton was the was the how he was billed. He was a man who was exceptionally thin and bony, and there was a real living skeleton character act in P.T. Barnum's American Museum and on the road shows. And the reason he was so thin was because he had a genetic condition, which means he couldn't take in many nutrients, and so he could eat and eat and eat and just wouldn't grow fatter. This person does not eat. He eats like 4 green beans, and he's a really he narrates it, and it is as sort of bony and prickly and fragile as he is. It's a very tightly wound narration, and some people I think might not like that, but I quite enjoyed it. And he looks down on other freaks, other oddities, the ones that make themselves, the ones that tattoo their skin or act in certain ways um, to get the attention. He calls them gaffs. But then he discovers really that he's the same. I mean, the fact is he's skinny because he doesn't eat, and he doesn't eat because of very sensational and enjoyable revelations through the book. In this, he falls in love with a bearded lady who is another fictional character, and the bearded lady turns out to be a bit too much for him. Um, it's rather empty of plot, really. There isn't a lot that happens in the book. He pines after the bearded lady, and he goes on little trips and things. He becomes like a pawn between P.T. Barnum and his wife, and P.T. Barnum and the bearded lady. And P.T. Barnum in this is a very cold, distant character, sort of a absent boss, and there's always the threat of losing his job that's very heavy, hangs over this. It's like we're very well treated as oddities in the American Museum, but we have to toe the line to stay there. It was quite tense that he was going to lose his job. But yeah, it wasn't a great novel. It somehow it was missing something. Uh, not totally sure what actually. I think maybe more of a plot, or more action, or I don't know. There was yeah, it wasn't great, that novel. It was okay. It wasn't great. So I went from novels to a history book called The Wonders by John Woolf. And now you're sort of seeing the theme. We've gone sort of physical difference, and now we've gone on to this is a history of the freak show, the circus, and the Victorian age. And it starts off with a story of Geoffrey Hudson to say how in the 17th century there were dwarves in court, and then there's a sort of a late 17th, early 18th century dwarf who gives performances in courts and sort of in rooms. And then we go to the fat man, Daniel Lambert, who was a very fat man. He was a very fat man, whose grave I've been to. There I am. And he would hire a house and he'd invite people in to come and chat with him. And yes, they were there to ogle at this very fat man, but it was still sort of kept at a certain level. And then we get to Chang and Eng, who are the reason they're conjoined twins from Siam. They're the original Siamese twins. I read a novel about them years ago, and if I remembered where I put it, I think it's at my parents' house. I might have read that as well, because it's quite good. Because in the book they have really different personalities, and it's a real strain for them to be physically joined together the whole time. But in this context of this book, Chang and Eng are being presented places as sort of medical, scientific curiosities, and then they take control of their own management, and with that they buy land, they get married, they own slaves, and become sort of southern gentlemen in America. And yeah, and at this time there's more of a circuit going on, and then the middle chunk is all about P.T. Barnum, who expands this circuit, expands the range. It's a lot about him, his early things with Joyce Heth. I mean, this is P.T. Barnum's such an interesting character because he did things like buy a slave, have her in a non-slave state, put her on show, work her to death, and then sell tickets to the autopsy. Uh, I mean, this is not; these are not good actions. But then with things like Charles Stratton, Tom Thumb, yes, he essentially bought the services of a 4-year-old child and instructed him to do skits and things. But because Charles Stratton had, must have been an almost innate skill at these things, he learnt them and he did them and he performed them. And he must have enjoyed it because he could have retired at the age of 9 as a millionaire, but he didn't. He carried on the rest of his life. And they have this very, the relationship starts with a man and the person he essentially owns. But in the end, Charles Stratton's lending him money, giving him advice. They become quite equal. And in all sort of reports from the people who worked at the American Museum as oddities, it was the best place to go if you had that kind of deformity that you could monetize, because you were looked after and ruffians were kept away and all of this, and a lot of them earned a lot of money and went off and retired. So a lot of the freak show performers went and retired and lived comfortable lives and married people and all this kind of stuff. But P.T. Barnum, he's got some dark things that he did. It's very interesting. And then of course he owned this slave who he worked to death, putting this poor old lady for 8 hours on exhibition. But then he was a key part of the abolitionist movement. Yeah. Anyway, that was interesting. And then the last sort of story in here, and this is kind of the problem with the book. It tells stories of different performers. It doesn't really have a through line, particularly except for the rise and fall of the freak show. So the story that represents the fall is Joseph Merrick, who you might know better as John Merrick, but his real name was Joseph, aka the Elephant Man. And if you've seen the film, it's based on the writings of Treves, the doctor, in which the medical establishment give him a safe place to live without being stared at. But there was another account of him written by the showman, in which Merrick was happy. He'd been in a workhouse, for quite big chunks of his life because he couldn't work because he was so, physically disabled. Um, but being on tour, he could work and he could have his own independence and his own, choice in his own life. And when the medical people got him, he was essentially a prisoner. Where the truth of that lies, I don't know. And also, it reflects in the book the declining fortunes of the freak show. You know, it's no longer something that kings and queens and like Queen Victoria went to, and it's now back where it started. Scuzzy things around fairs, and this is the story he's trying to tell, but he doesn't go in enough about the weird, how much is exploitation, how much is exploiting yourself. You're born with a disability that makes people stare at you. Well, do you then go, right, well, people are staring at me anyway, I might as well charge them for it? How much, and also the different kinds of people had different, different outcomes. Your Charles Stratton's, who can perform, who's a good performer by himself, he can take charge of it. He can become his own manager. He can tour himself. He can do really well. But then you've got people like the Aztec twins or Julia Pastrana. The Aztec twins were people with microcephaly, very small heads, and as a result, they had sort of brain damage. They couldn't look after themselves, and they were essentially just treated as animals and shoved on the stage and married to each other, even though they were brother and sister, which is ugh. And poor old Julia Pastrana, she married her manager, who toured her around. And when she died, he stuffed her body and toured that around. So it seems like freak business was the same as any other show business. You can be terribly, terribly manipulated and abused, or you can ride it into a form of power that you would never have got anyway. I think that's quite similar for able-bodied performers in its own way. It's this machine. It feeds on bums on seats and cash. And some people get lucky out of it and some people don't, I think. Anyway, so moving away from the sort of differently bodied and stuff, I've gone towards circuses. I was going to read about the first clown, but because this book is so fat, I read this one first, which I was going to read after. I bought it because it has the most wonderful title. It's called The Life and Adventures of Harvey Teasdale, the converted clown and man-monkey, with his remarkable conversion in Wakefield Prison. What a title. And what a book. I mean, Harvey Teasdale is a git. He's a horrible person. There is no escaping that. So he was born in Sheffield, and he tells stories about his young life and how he's a bit of a scamp and how he stole things and how he cheated from he slipped away from school and he used to get beaten. All the stories end with him coming home having lost his cap, and then he got into theatre, and as he got into theatre, he got into sort of this character he created for himself called the Man Monkey. There are other people who are men monkeys as well, so he'd leap around. At one point, he leapt from the stalls, he said, to the stage. So he essentially just threw himself about with no training. Other people did this with training, or families doing this kind of thing. No, he just threw himself around, told jokes, and pretended to be a monkey, and was very successful at it. He then sort of put this into different pubs that didn't quite work, and then he'd go out on tour again, and etc., etc., etc. And then he got jealous of his wife, and this is where he's such a shit. So he went to his wife, said, "You're cheating on me," and she said, "No, I'm not. Leave me alone. I mean, I never see you anyway. You're always on tour. You're drunk all the time. You're probably cheating on me. Oh, you're cheating on me. You're cheating on me." And then he shot her with a blank gun, slashed at her with a razor, and then slashed at himself. A sort of murder-suicide attempt. And he was arrested, but because he was famous, I suppose, or whatever reason, his evidence make him seem like a shit anyway. His excuse was, I wasn't trying to kill her, I was just trying to make her feel sorry for me. So he goes to prison, And there he's converted. But he makes a big point of saying, I wasn't converted by the chaplain or anything. I converted myself. So he's converted to the pre-runner of the Salvation Army called the Hallelujah Chorus, and started putting on shows where he talks about his terrible life and how he's now redeemed, and he immolates stage props and things. And this becomes a huge scandal as well because, well, he's burnt the same props in Leeds and Sheffield. So even this is just an act, and he gets very angry in the book by people who say, no, it's just an act. I am reformed, and there's stuff all the way through it where he's talking about, this person, or if only they'd seen Jesus and all of this. It's like, you haven't seen Jesus at all, have you? You're just faking it. And then the book ends. Quite an unpleasant man, but there were loads of really good anecdotes in it of not just theatrical life, but real sort of scuzzy provincial theatrical life, where he keeps going on these surefire winner tours that give him no money and things like that, and all these great actors. This is a great local actor. He's going to get real big, and they come up and they forget all their lines and get bottled off the stage or whatever. There's loads of good theatrical anecdotes, and theatrical anecdotes in the sense of rough and tumble, and not just, oh yes, well I saw Larry Olivier the other day. Yeah, not that kind. Just it's like the real Muppet Show, but then with a horrible, tempting murder bit in it. Interesting man, not a nice one. And so I finally went with this book, The Pantomime Life of Joseph Grimaldi by Andrew McConell Stott. And it is about Joseph Grimaldi, who is sort of the first clown. I thought this would be in circuses and things. He did perform a little in Astley's Circus, the first thing to be called a circus, but he mostly performed on legit theatre, Covent Garden, Drury Lane, the two Paynton theatres, and Sadler's Wells, and then he went on tour. And he was on the same kind of touring schedules as Dora Jordan and other, Edmund Kean and proper actors and things. And I learned what the harlequinade was and what a pantomime originally was. So I knew it come from Italian commedia dell'arte, but I didn't know how it became what it is now. And so this very English thing in which they'd start off with a story, usually sort of a fairy story, with big wooden heads on, and at one point they'd be transformed and they'd take the wooden heads off and there'd be 4 stock characters. There'd be the old guy, Pantaloon, be Harlequin and Columbine, and they love each other, and Harlequin's trying to get hold of Columbine, but Pantaloon is the old man, usually her father doesn't want it. And then Clown, who was originally sort of dressed as a country bumpkin, who is the rustic servant of Pantaloon. But Joseph Grimaldi changed it, and so he changed up the costume and put this on to make it a bit more razzmatazz than just country bumpkin. But also, as Harlequin changed, he became more of a sort of, he was a bit of a trickster who was getting the girl, but now he becomes more this light, balletic lover. And so now the clown gets all the trickster roles, and so now the clown isn't really the servant anymore, he's just this figure of chaos. And Grimaldi was famous for doing this. And there were descriptions of it, and I don't really get it, because it's essentially just things turning into other things and silly stuff happening. But he was loved for it, and he had to throw himself around a lot, and it completely crippled his health. And so he retired at the age of 40 odd. It's a sad story. He was a depressive. He says that, I make you laugh at night, but I'm grim all day, which is an awful pun. His father was a right twat. He was also a clown, his father, and the choreographer for various things. And so he had this stable of 13, 14-year-old girls who he essentially slept with. And Grimaldi was the result of one of those. His father also beat kids, and there was one act where little Grimaldi had a chain round his waist, and big Grimaldi would pick him up and swing him round, which is very similar to the act that Buster Keaton had with his dad. Though Buster Keaton always says it was good fun, and they worked it out together. Grimaldi did not have good fun with his dad on this. So yeah, that's the essential story, and then there's stuff at the end about Grimaldi's son, who sort of been unable to live up to his reputation, just lost it in a haze of drunkenness and getting arrested, and he got bashed on the head with a truncheon, which gave him epileptic fits, and he may have died of being poisoned. He died ranting bits of scripts, and before he died. And he's not the only person who got poisoned in this. One of the Harlequins in this gets poisoned, survives, and then lives the rest of his life with a blue face. And this is where the real fun of the book is. Grimaldi he's in it and he's through it, and it is Grimaldi's life. But the best stuff is not the Grimaldi stuff. Grimaldi's quite normal, really. He wants a good career and a nice home life. Everyone else is a nutter. There's so many crazy things going on. It's packed full of, there's Belzoni, who I've got a book about and may read another time, who was a strong man, who then finds himself in Egypt being one of, essentially a tomb robber. He's the reason we have that huge Seti the whatever statue in the British Museum. The amount of fun animal acts there were, I didn't know this, but there was Caro, the wonder dog, who used to save people from fake drowning. There was a dog called Moustache, who was dressed in army clothes, and they'd have reenact battles with dogs. There's a whole bunch of fun dog stuff. At one point, Sadler's Wells, they redirected the river under the stage, ripped up the floorboards, went, haha, we have a big pool of water now, and staged naval battles, things they called aquadrama, which were melodramas but with water involved, a big waterfall, and in one of those another dog came in and saved someone's life in the plot. Just all these people living these outrageous lives. There was another clown who they all went to Ireland, did a tour, come back, the ship was a wreck, the sailors didn't know how to sail it, and so the clown sailed the ship back. Just crazy things, and a bit of me's like, oh, we don't live these kind of lives anymore. It's probably a good thing. There's a lot of pain, suffering, and exploitation in this book, but it is all so big and so extravagant and so entertaining to read about. This was such a good book. I really enjoyed it. So much so I've bought his book on the Shakespeare Jubilee, because I think he'll do very well with the chaos that was that. So yeah, that was my month. It was about show business and performance and bodily difference and that sort of thing, and it was very interesting. I'm currently reading Horace Walpole's Letters for a Samuel Johnson book group, and I don't know which of these piles I'm going to attack next. We'll see. Anyway, thank you very much.